So I sent out the pilot for the show, and a couple of people who watched it asked me, how did you do the 16-hour Cliffs of Dover challenge? And again, I'll qualify this by saying I didn't do it as perfectly as I wanted to. I definitely learned the song. And I was able to play the whole thing beginning to end in 16 hours in the one day. But I definitely was still polishing it the week after, and I could keep going further with it if I want. But there was this intensity about the initial process that was like, it was both exhilarating and really effective in terms of learning faster. All right, now it is push time. I think I'm going to make or break this in this hour because I'm really starting to... my focus is starting to wane. And if I want to show others how to replicate the formula, here's essentially where I'm going to explain it all. The main thing you got to realize is things like this are a synergy of the how and the why. Part of it is you learn better learning techniques, but you also bring it together with what you really care about in your life, and you kick yourself into a state of hyper-focus, which is one of the reasons to do it, because it's really fun to do this. It feels really good. But you also get a lot done, and it also can change your life a lot. So trying to bring these things together is a real key, but you do have to focus on bringing those two things, the how and the why of the project, together before that state can happen. So the first thing you got to do is you got to pick a challenge that you love and that you can do. And to just skip all the analysis of you, I'm just going to explain why I did this. I picked the Cliffs of Dover challenge because first of all, I realized that I could do it, but I also needed a pilot for a show that I was going to do, which was the Swift equation. So in terms of just getting a pilot that I knew I could do in one day, and I thought was going to be an interesting project and helpful to other guitarists and helpful to me as a guitarist, I knew it was going to work. All those things just clicked in my head, and I just knew. And that spark is how you know, okay, you're on the path. If on some level you don't believe you can do it, that spark's not going to happen. But as soon as you think about it for a bit and you find a project that you're really into, but you also think, that would be challenging, but I think I can do it. All right, that's when that spark can happen. And when that happens, now you know you're onto something. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to go over some more of the details of how I thought through this whole thing, and then, encourage you to apply them to your own situation. This looks hard. Now, the number one thing that was going into this was the fact that, I've already done some lead guitar before. If I was literally starting from, I don't know any pentatonic scales, there's no way I could try to learn Cliffs of Dover in one day. There's no way. But I remember a couple of years ago, I was trying to learn the guitar solo to Since I've Been Loving You by Led Zeppelin, and I learned the whole thing on trains. I was riding trains and I didn't have a guitar with me, but I had a transcription, and I literally just read the transcription on the train. And, from doing that, I kind of knew I was going to be able to do this, because the reason I could do that was because I had already done, I had already memorized all the main arpeggios and scales and blues licks that were the core vocabulary of the song. And, once you kind of know the language of something a bit, absorbing, a new solo is not nearly as hard. But if you haven't done that core background, if you haven't done the drills, and to a certain degree, I actually hadn't done all the drills needed for this song, there's a certain degree of the speed I knew I didn't have going in. But what I was able to do going in was, knowing that, I was able to identify the licks that I knew I wasn't going to be able to pull off right away, and to write musical sounding substitutes. One of the things I thought of was, if I can't push a lot of these licks to speed, I can create tension by doing something else. And one of the techniques I tried to do is what I called additive rhythm. I would take the rhythms of the phrases and really emphasize a kind of offbeatness or an irregularity to them, which increases a sense of musical tension, but doesn't actually force me to play faster. So, I would play a little faster, but not like 30% or 40% faster like Eric Johnson would do. But still, I think to most folks, it would give the same musical effect, which is really, really key. Because if I really tried to vie for all the speed, no way this is going to happen, out of the range of my ability for the time that I'm given. But I could still get the core piece down, express the music of it, and still get all the effects across just by simplifying some of the licks or replacing some of the speed things with other musical devices that sound just as good. But there's a couple of other really key techniques that really helped me out with this process, and without of which I would have crashed almost certainly. One of the most basic things is just understanding a really solid sequence for learning. The first thing you always got to do is you got to chunk stuff. You got to break it down in pieces that are so small that you can't get them wrong. And the biggest part of this is just faith. People often don't have the faith in their own ability to learn, to slow down that much, to think if they don't go fast, they're never going to get it. And the fact is, if you don't go slow enough, you're never going to get it. You're never going to get deep enough into the music to play it right at a high speed. So a huge part of it is just, if you got to develop that really deep-seated faith that if you really sit with something and you really just like absorb it and just play it slow enough to nail every little detail of it, you got to just trust eventually it's going to get fast. And if you don't have that going into this, when the pressure cooks up, you're just going to fall apart and not balance the process. So that's really key. But one technique that goes along with that stops you from just like the train from running away on you is a technique they call the meadow mount technique. You'll see in the video, I actually took every single bar of the score and chopped it up into tiny little pieces. And that actually really helps. It's what they teach at the Meadow Mount School of Music, where, they're learning violin and piano concertos all the time. It's a classical music school. And, when you're working on a concerto, which is ostensibly a very long, very difficult piece, very similar to this, there's a tendency to try to overstretch yourself, to try to play too long of phrases and to not catch the details. And they say two main things. One, if you break it up into these teeny pieces, like literally every bar of music, there's no temptation to go on to the next bar when you haven't really mastered the bar you're on, because it's not there. So it really keeps your focus in the right place. Now, of course, I cheated a little bit. I did what I consider to be whole phrases of music, but I thought that worked actually fine for me, because one of the things I didn't want to do was come up with fingerings that weren't cohesive with the things around them. So I took slightly larger chunks than individual bars, but I mean, that worked absolutely fine for me. I thought I still kept a pretty good balance of working with things, but the main thing is I also was able to not have to go and refinger stuff later, because I kind of knew the context well enough to keep things, my ducks lined up. So that was huge. I've actually never applied that technique before, but actually taking the time to print the score, cut it out, it gave me a lot more confidence, first of all, because I knew I had a method of just systematically and I wrote little check marks. I literally wrote tallies for every time I practiced something. So I had a sense of how much I practiced different bars, and I knew the hard ones I was going to need more time on. So I have this whole field of way of organizing my progress, which was really big. And you'll see as the video went on, I also literally started putting the bars in order. So as I started to understand the piece, I could see my progress, which is both really motivating and really key to keeping yourself on target. Because you realize, if you haven't even like sequenced the whole piece by the time you're a certain, number of hours into your process, you're way, way, way off. It's been about an hour and 8 minutes. I've learned 23 out of 183 bars in 1 hour. So being able to just keep track of your progress and know that you're on target and know when you got to move on and when you're obsessing about a detail too much, or when it's time to simplify something or just like make something more performable, keeping a balance of that is really, really important. Another really key technique I used in this was different mnemonic techniques, different techniques to help me memorize the piece. And usually these involve abstract images that seem to be a little absurd, but kind of catch your memory a little bit, and they really help you hang on to weird stuff. You'll notice there's this funny moment where I'm like talking about hot sauce and a sandwich. And there's another moment where I was talking about, I had some crass poem I was using, and it's like, the sequences I was doing there were ones that didn't really make a lot of sense to me initially. And if I wanted to remember the weird things about him, I came up with a picture in my head that somehow matched what was going on. And one, it was like the way the sections of the bridge of the song were organized. I just saw it like a sandwich. There are certain parts that were repeated, and I was like, well, why are these repeated like this? I'm like, I just treated it like it was a sandwich. These meat sections, which were like the main riff to me, the most simple version of it. I'm like, this is the meat of the sandwich. And then there's other parts, like this is like a version of the riff that's like different. It's like fancy. I just call it the hot sauce, So I just organized it like a sandwich, and I could remember that order instantly right away. It was easy. And then with another part, I was trying to remember like the irregular, as I was saying, the additive rhythms of the intro solo, which was really weird. And the way I kind of kept both the musical emphasis and the note sequence in my head was by coming up with a little poem that I matched up to the words. Now, what's interesting about that is that I realized at the end of this process, if I really wanted to do this whole thing again better, I could go back and I could actually work on that mnemonic process, and I could work on my speed. There's like always core abilities that you can work on that will make you do these speed challenges faster. And they're fun to work on too, but it's like you really want to like get in a cycle of mastering a kind of music, learning the background techniques, learning the drills that are going to make you master the style, but then applying them to these speed challenges is a really measurable, exhilarating way to develop your guitar playing. But, going back and me looking at the mnemonic technique, if I could have found ways to make up words that would have actually fit the notes better, rather than just the rhythm, that would have made it way easier to memorize that beginning. Because I really got stuck. I got tripped up on that beginning part a lot. So trying to figure out a system for matching the notes to the words actually would have gotten me through it a lot faster. And that's something I can develop later, but which I'm actually interested in developing because it's just, I know it would make a difference, but it would also be kind of cool to get in the guts of something like that. And the other thing that was really interesting about this whole process was just like the sense of energy about it. First of all, when you really design a project well and you really set yourself up for it, you know, I had a setup that I really believed in. I had all my food ready for the day, so I wasn't going to be distracted by cooking. I had a couple of meetings I'd planned in, but they were planned breaks, basically, from the work. And there were even some times when I got really, really tired and I just literally just sat in that chair and just was just absolutely silent. I was just absolutely just restoring my mental energy so that when I went back into it, I was fresh. And, you know, scientifically, that's been shown to make a huge difference in your ability to learn and retain stuff. But also, it was just like, cool. I just felt like I was totally in ninja mode when I was doing stuff like that. And it really exhilarated me to challenge myself on that level. It was just intense trying to manage my own energy, to really push myself when I was tired, to really make difficult decisions about, you know, whether or not I should be resting or whether or not I should be working or whether or not I should be moving on to the next phase. You know, all those things make it kind of an adventure. And, you know, all the momentum of that makes it really exciting and really driven. And it also stimulates your brain more. It's going to make you more likely to remember the stuff that you did. And so I think it's going to make the practice hours more effective than if you kind of spread them out and just chip away at it every day. As everyone knows, like that's kind of an onerous task to do. Whereas like something like this is way more stimulating. And I think it's a process I encourage other people to adopt because it's something I'm always refining. But I found this to be really interesting. And I mean, all I really had to do is like find a Saturday when I didn't have a ton going on. And I mean, it wasn't really hard to push a lot of my appointments from a Saturday to a Sunday or, you know, to like just like, you know, clearing a day every month and a half. To do something like this is very reasonable, I think very feasible for a lot of people, you know, but also, you know, very fun. And so you can adjust the parameters to fit you, but the main thing you're looking for is the spark. You really want to feel the drive that comes from, oh yeah, this is something I can do. This is something, if you think you can do it, you might be wrong, but if you believe you can do it on some level and you are driven by it in terms of its purpose, you know, that's what's going to make the hyper-focus kick in. And the hyper-focus is almost makes the process more important than the product because it's so fun to do. So anyway, that's my short version of how this whole intensive immersion learning for guitar stuff works. I'm working on applying this at different scales, but it's been, you know, really fun to develop this. If you have comments on this, thoughts, ideas to share, you know, drop them in the link below. Drop me a message. Email me, john@johnmichaelswift.com. I'd love to hear from people about, you know, what they think of this process. If they do the process themselves, I'd love to write about you on my channel if I think we can work it out. So, you know, ideas I'm batting around here. Thanks for checking this video out. I'll catch y'all later. Bye-bye.